everyone, once again. Welcome. This is the Pitcher Nailed Down. I am Big Italy 42, joined by Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life, and we're going to be bringing you a breakdown of all of tonight's pitchers, starting at 7:05. There is that weird early slate if you want to play the 6 and 7 o'clock only games, but all the big prize pools, all the tournaments you really want to be in, starting with the 7 o'clock games. So we're going to give you our breakdown of all these pitchers, and we're going to start things from the top here. Scott, you ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, top pitcher on the night, price-wise, and you and I agree that he's the top option on the night as well. $10,400 on DraftKings, $11,000 on FanDuel is David Price, who this is including getting shelled last time against the Yankees. His numbers on the season still pretty good, 21% strikeout rate, 7.6% walk rate, which is fine. That's been his really only concern this year outside of that one bad start was the walks. He does have 8 in his last 3 games. But, gave up 1 earned run in his first 3 starts. He's still allowing just a 265 WOBA to right-handed batters. A lot of righties in this Minnesota lineup. They're one of the worst offenses in the league. This is one that's pretty cut and dry. He's your top option. The only reason anyone should be or would be worried about David Price tonight is overreacting to the one start against the Yankees.
Yeah, definitely. He's far and away the top option, I think. He's a solid favorite facing a Minnesota team that Felix Hernandez just dominated on Friday. Basically, Minnesota hasn't really gotten the job done against anyone so far. And if you were playing all the pitchers against them, you'd be in pretty good shape right now, even the less quality ones than Price. I don't think you need to worry about that one game at all. He struggled against the Yankees in his career, especially at Yankee Stadium. He's a guy that I feel like you just need to roster tonight. He seems like a decent step above the rest of the guys here, and for some of them, not even that huge of a price increase.
Yeah, and Vegas agrees. Minus 152 favorite is the biggest on the night for any pitcher, so that right there tells you, and he's on the road. To see a pitcher that big of a favorite on the road, that right there tells you Vegas expecting the pitcher to dominate, him to get some run support as well. So this one, really not too much into it. Pretty obvious top option as far as we're concerned. Next up, price-wise, Cole Hamels, $9,300 on FanDuel, $9,800 on DraftKings, and this is a guy that I'm not touching tonight. I might even throw in a contrarian stack with some Cardinals righties. He's been pretty awful against right-handed batters this year. 371 WOBA, allowed 7 home runs in 18 1/3 innings. He's doing a good job keeping the ball on the ground at 55.4%, but a 12% walk rate right there. A lot of red flags here using Cole Hamels against this lineup tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I still am a big Cole Hamels believer. I don't think this is a great situation for him, though. He's not favored here. Like you said, there's some decent right-handed bats in the Cardinals lineup. He will neutralize Matt Carpenter a little bit, which is good because he's been red hot. But outside of a GPP play, just on the chance, he can go deep into games, so he's got some upside.
Yeah.
But outside of GPPs, where you're playing him because he's low owned and has that really high upside if he's pitching really well, I don't want to count on it for cash games. I don't want to pay that much to count on it for cash games. There's other options out here that I prefer for sure.
Yeah, and like you said, he's almost $10,000 and he's a plus 135 dog. If I'm paying that kind of price tag for a pitcher, he damn well better be a favorite.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel about it too. Like I said, you can go for it in GPPs. I think he'll be really low owned and you can get some massive upside there because he is a guy that can throw a ton of pitches, pitch really deep into games. Has had a decent strikeout rate this season. We know what it's been over his career. But outside of that, I just don't trust it tonight. I don't like the matchup. I don't like the underdog factor. It's just not an ideal situation for that price.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So I think he's a guy that will not be on any of my rosters tonight outside of maybe a single tournament. All right, next up is a game that has 2 pitchers, so we're going to talk about both of them here. I know you and I both like both pitchers. James Shields, a slight favorite at home. Just a 6-run total at Petco. Tells you Vegas agrees. This one's going to be low scoring. Got James Shields versus Colin McHugh. We'll talk James Shields first. He's $9,600 on DraftKings, which is a steep price, but he's at home in a good situation against an offense that's been pretty terrible. They really only hit lefties. But if you look at his FanDuel price, $8,100, almost a $3,000 discount from David Price. I think he's a fine pivot in cash games if you can't afford Price. You should be able to. There's a lot of cheap options as far as hitting goes on FanDuel, but that's a really, really good price tag for James Shields and his almost 28% strikeout rate on the season at FanDuel.
Yeah, and I think Houston is third worst strikeout rate against righties on the season too. I think I saw that this morning. That's a really solid matchup for him. Love that price on FanDuel. Really hard to argue with it. I actually might prefer him over price for cash games because of that price discount. It lets you just load your lineup up at FanDuel today with how soft the pricing is. You can basically get any hitters you want. If you find like one or two value plays, which isn't very hard either. So I really like that there. I don't mind Shields if you want to go two aces on DraftKings with Price and Shields. He's probably my second one also. Like I said, I love the matchup with Houston. Pretty big favorite here. He's looked pretty good lately. I wasn't expecting him to have as good a year this year as he's had the last couple. He's looked basically the same. All of his peripheral numbers are really similar. It's going to be about getting run support, which the San Diego lineup has looked a lot better also, even playing in that tough hitters park. But you got to love him tonight at Petco.
Yeah, absolutely. And I looked up that stat while you were talking. And Astros actually are worse now in the league. Really close between them, the Marlins, and the Twins, but 23.9% strikeout rate against righties is just absolutely terrible. So, I mean, massive upside there with James Shields tonight.
Yeah, they're like supposed righty hitters are all struggling besides Altuve. I mean, Chris Carter is probably contributing a ton of that strikeout rate by himself.
Yeah.
But
that's a lock for about 2 to 3 strikeouts right there.
Yeah, exactly. Shields. So, I mean, I feel pretty good about that one. They're like we said, they're down at the bottom in strikeout rate. He's looked good strikeout wise. I think this is a great chance to make some money as far as Shields goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the opposite side of things, you've got Colin McHugh, who I think is in a fine spot as well. The Padres, like you said, their offense has been okay. They've been right around league average. 13th in strikeout rate against righties at 21%. McHugh striking out 24% of batters right now. He's been really tough on righties at 229 WOBA allowed so far. Has not allowed a home run yet. So Petco right there telling you that obviously home runs can be had at Petco, but it's still the best pitcher's park. So he's doing a good job of keeping the ball on the ground at 54.7%. So I think if you're not going Shields, McHugh makes for a great tournament swerve.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most of San Diego's really big bats are right-handed. Like you said, he's been tough on righties, not giving up home runs. They have a lot of home run hitters in their lineup. This is another really good matchup. Like, he's more of a GPP play for me, like you said, because he is the underdog here, and I think Shields has a great matchup also. But, I mean, this is going to be a really low-scoring game. So I like him and Shields in GPPs. Obviously, I wouldn't play them together because you can't get the win from both of them. But if you can get McHugh in there, he gets the win. I mean, you're going to be pretty good if that's one of your pitchers tonight on DraftKings or your only pitcher on FanDuel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you there. Moving down a little bit further, John Lackey going against a terrible offense in the Phillies. He's at home, so you expect he's a big favorite. Vegas really likes him. He's a minus 145 favorite. Yep. He's been not great this season. He's been okay. If you're looking at the Phillies numbers, right around league average, 20.6% strikeout rate against righties. But their team WOBA was 250, which is just absolutely awful. 56 WRC plus is just absolutely abysmal. One of the worst in the entire league. Actually, I believe they are the worst in the league, actually, against right-handed pitching. So, Lackey, not a guy with huge upside, 16.7% strikeout rate. Does a fairly good job of keeping the ball on the ground. So, I mean, he makes for an okay tournament option, but you're not expecting huge things. And with him being priced similarly to guys like James Shields, he's $700 less than him on FanDuel. He's $700 less than McHugh on DraftKings. I just don't think he's an option I'm really looking at much tonight.
No, he's more of a secondary cash game option to me.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, he doesn't have a big strikeout rate. I mean, what you're hoping for if you play him is Philly's bats stay cold. He pitches 7 innings, gives up a run or two, strikes out 4, 5, 6 guys. He's just not going to give you that massive upside. He's not going to go and throw a complete game for you. He's not going to strike out 12 guys. So he's more of a secondary cash game play for me. But like you said, especially on FanDuel, he's priced too close to some of these better options.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. Next up, Doug Fister, who, if you're looking at his price tag, he's $8,300 on FanDuel. His DraftKings price at $7,600. And the Braves striking out the 4th least in the league against right-handed pitching at 17.4%. And Doug Fister also has, by far, not even close, the lowest strikeout rate of any pitcher on the board tonight, 9.8%. I mean, that's absolutely horrible. I mean, he's always been a contact pitcher, never been a big strikeout guy, but at least closer to league average. so I really don't expect huge things. And this is a Braves lineup that, despite, when we weren't expecting big things out of them, and they haven't been awful. I mean, they've been about league average, a 301 team WOBA. So I just think this is another situation. You could look at it as a secondary cash game, similar to Lackey, like you had mentioned, but Fister's really just not a guy. I mean, with strikeouts being so heavily weighted in DFS for the most part, it's just really not a guy I'm looking at all.
Yeah, if I'm taking one of those two guys, it's going to be Lackey every time, I think, right now. Philly's just hitting much worse. They strike out more. Lackey's that really heavy favorite. I know Fister's a favorite too, but I just feel better about Lackey here.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, Ubaldo Jimenez at $7,200 on DraftKings. His price on FanDuel is $6,600. This is a guy that I don't love. I don't like ever playing him because his walk rate is through the roof usually. 11.7% so far this year, pretty much on par with his career averages. 26.7% strikeout rate is nice, and this is a White Sox team that strikes out quite a bit. But at the same time, I mean, he's just the guy that just scares the hell out of me every time I would roster him. I mean, he's just so prone to implosion with those high walk rates. There are some big bats for the White Sox. They do strike out 10th most in the league against righties, 21.8%. But, I mean, LaRoche, Abreu, some guys that can really punish you, especially if you give some free passes tonight. So I don't like rostering anyone with a high walk rate. So I think that he's maybe a single tournament bullet because of the strikeout potential, but that's about it.
Yeah, definitely. That's all that would keep him in play for me. I like a couple of these other guys that are priced around him on both sites a little bit more upside-wise. I mean, with him, it's like you said, if he can avoid the walks, he usually has a nice game. If he gives up a bunch of walks, he's usually in a lot of trouble because he's not a good pitcher out of the stretch. It's pretty easy to steal on him because he's slow to the plate. I mean, he just gets himself in a lot of trouble with the walks. If he had better control, I really like his stuff. I mean, we saw him as a dominant pitcher before.
Yeah.
Much like Tim Lincecum, who I'm sure we're going to talk about shortly here.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he's just struggling with walks too much. Now, I'm projecting him for like 3+ walks every time he takes the mound, which
sounds about
is
right.
not, yeah, which is not, I mean, everyone else is like between 1.2 and 1.8. And I mean, 3 is like, I'd be ecstatic to get 3 out of them sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, Vegas has him as a nice favorite at minus 145, but it's an 8.5 run total, which tells you we're expecting runs to be scored. Probably, obviously, more on the Baltimore side with Hector Noesi on the other side. But, yeah, I mean, even Vegas saying they'll probably win, but he's going to give up some runs. So, I mean, yeah, high risk, high reward type of guy for you there tonight. Next up, we're going to look at Jason Hamill, $7,100 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's at $7,500. This Pittsburgh team getting a nice park upgrade from PNC, moving over to Wrigley now. And Hamill's been, I don't know, he hasn't been very good this year. He hasn't been terrible. The Pirates striking out 21.9% of the time. As a team, they're not hitting the ball particularly well. 285 team WOBA. So there's some upside with him tonight due to all those factors. And he is a slight favorite at minus 123. But a 7-run total. Vance Worley has pitched pretty well on the opposite side. I don't know how he's going to fare against this new Cubs lineup, but Jason Hamill, not a guy that I'm going out of my way to target tonight. He hasn't really walked anyone. 1.4% strikeout rate is tremendous, but other than that, he's pretty much average.
Yeah, I mean, another nice factor for him is I think the wind's blowing in from left field about 20 miles an hour, which is nice. Reduces that park factor in Chicago a little bit.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot I feel really good about. I mean, he is a favorite, but not a heavy one. He's more of a secondary cash game play type guy for me, too. I don't feel really strongly about him either way. I think he's just an average play. And if anything, you're playing him in cash games, hoping that he's a little bit lower owned and the top guys blow up. But I'm not really expecting the top guys to blow up today. So probably a guy I'm going to avoid for the most part.
Yeah, and that Pittsburgh lineup got off to a really bad start. They are starting to get it together. Neil Walker's gotten hot. Josh Harrison's starting to hit the ball. I mean, Starling Marte. So, I mean, there's definitely some guys that can punish him in a hurry if he doesn't have his best stuff today. And as we know, he doesn't walk anyone, so he's given up quite a bit of contact. So, guy I'm probably avoiding as well. Next up, Tim Lincecum is a guy that I do like in tournaments. $6,900 on DraftKings, $6,300 on I can't even talk today. On FanDuel, $6,300. Really great price tag there. One of the cheaper pitchers on the board. And he is an underdog today to Brett Anderson, mostly due to the fact that this is in LA and the Dodgers have a better offense. Low total, though, 7.5 runs, not bad. Lincecum's been great against lefties, a 181 WOBA allowed so far this year. Keeping the ball on the ground, 60.4%. So that's been his bread and butter this year because he is walking 10% of batters. And hasn't been particularly good against righties. But like you said in the other podcast earlier, he's not the Tim Lincecum he once was. But he still has good enough stuff to help you out in a GPP tonight at under $7,000.
Yeah, I like him. I think he's a strong GPP play. He's a guy that you can only really roster in GPPs tonight, being an underdog, facing a pretty tough lineup. But like you said, he has a lot of upside. The Dodgers have been striking out a decent amount. He's looked pretty good. I mean, I've been pretty impressed with the way he's been pitching, especially with how low his velocity's been lately. I mean, he's learned to pitch a little bit, and it took him a couple years to figure it out from when he was throwing 97, 98 all the time.
Yeah.
But he's looked like a much better pitcher. His walk rate's down a little bit. He's still a guy you got to worry about with walks, much like Ubaldo, but not nearly as devastating as Jimenez is with those. Yeah, I really like him as a GPP play. He's going to be super low owned. If he can get hot, strike out a few batters, get pretty deep into the game. That's another thing is he's looked pretty healthy and has been going pretty deep into games, and that's a big thing for him because he's struggled with injuries over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and especially on FanDuel where you're only getting points for strikeouts and innings pitched, so even if he doesn't strike out a lot of guys, if he pitches deep into the game, could easily pay off that really cheap price tag tonight. All right, next up we have Jimmy Nelson, who makes a really interesting tournament play. Pitching in Cincinnati at Great American Ballpark, you obviously don't like that, but he's had a tremendous ground ball rate this year at 57.8% through 3 starts, 25% strikeout rate, allowing a 205 WOBA to lefties, 194 to righties, has not given up a home run yet. He's at $7,100 on FanDuel, $6,900 on DraftKings. And this is a Reds lineup that's been spotty. I mean, they're either on or they're not. And they played really well in Milwaukee, scored a ton of runs there. But as we've seen, this is an offense that disappears at times. And the one game in Milwaukee where they didn't score runs was against this same Jimmy Nelson. 8 dominant innings, just 3 hits, 1 earned run, 5 Ks, 2 walks. I think he's a guy that's got some massive upside tonight in tournaments.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's pretty strong in GPP play, much like Lincecum. Has the same price on DraftKings. I think both of them are going to be pretty low owned, especially as underdogs. But like you said, Cincinnati can disappear at times. We're thinking Milwaukee's probably going to get it going at some point. I'm not particularly worried about this matchup. I'm sure we'll get to that later for Milwaukee's bats, although yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit before I get too deep into that black hole. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's a winnable game for sure. And that's a big thing as far as GPPs go. I mean, he's got a decent strikeout rate. The upside's all there. I'm not going to count on it for cash games, but if the upside's there, he makes a solid GPP play for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, this is a 9-run total, so obviously you're not loving either pitcher. I'm going to go ahead and skip Giovanni Gallardo unless you want to talk about him. He's not a guy I'm even considering tonight against that Seattle team.
No, not in Texas. Yeah, I mean, in Texas against a team that's been hitting righties pretty well. Nelson Cruz is still in that lineup. Not a guy I'm looking at.
Not at all. But on the other side of that, there is some tournament appeal with Taijuan Walker. Certainly very, very risky. I mean, he's earning that last name with his walk rate, which is absolutely massive at 14.7% so far this year. And finally had himself a good start last time out, 5 1/3, 8 Ks, 1 earned, 4 hits against Houston. It's a guy that throws a lot of pitches, doesn't pitch deep into games because he does walk a lot of batters. 10 walks already on the season. And that 5 1/3 was the deepest he's pitched into a game. Got crushed by Oakland, crushed by the Dodgers. But this is a Texas lineup that, outside of Prince Fielder, Adrian Beltre kind of getting it going, but they haven't been good at all this year. So, I mean, he's got big upside. He does have a 20.6% strikeout rate, but also concerns with fly ball. Only a 31% ground ball rate this year. I mean, allowing over a 400 WOBA to both lefties and righties. So, I mean, extremely risky, but, I mean, we've seen it when he's on. I mean, he's got great stuff. He can mow down a lineup, and this isn't a particularly daunting lineup either.
No, definitely not. And, I mean, he's definitely got some upside. The real concern I have in this game with both pitchers, I mean, we can't go get Gallardo or whatever, but there's a pretty decent chance of rain in this one.
Yeah.
Which is going to scare me away from Walker because, like you mentioned, he's already a guy that throws a ton of pitches and doesn't go deep into games. I mean, if you get a little bit of rain in the fourth inning or something, he might be at 80, 75, 80 pitches already and just be done for the night, even if it's a short delay. So that would worry me a little bit. He's just definitely more of a GPP play for me, but he looked really good in his last start. Looks like he's got a couple of his secondary pitches coming around a little bit this year. It's all about the strike zone with him, though, too. Like you mentioned, really big walk rate so far. Another one of those guys that is getting up towards 2-3 walks in projections. So not a guy that I'm targeting heavily, but he's definitely got some upside.
Yeah, definitely. As far as these cheap pitchers go, he's got one of the better upsides, like you mentioned. But I'm with you. Weather concerns, things like that. I mean, if I see that it's clear, I'll probably throw him in a couple of my tournament lineups. But outside of that, he's not really much on my radar because more risk than reward potentially with him tonight.
Yep.
All right, next up, Vance Worley. He's got a $6,200 price tag on DraftKings. His FanDuel price is pretty fair as well. I just lost it now. $7,100. So he's more of a play on DraftKings tonight. This is a Cubs lineup that does strike out a lot, as they always have, 22.9%. But they are walking at a really high clip at 9.1%. So it's a little bit of a concern with Worley, who is walking 10% of batters. I mean, that kind of feeds into the Cubs' favor. What he does have going for him, he's only given up one home run. 47% ground ball rate is fine. But at the same time, I mean, you are pitching on the road at Wrigley. You mentioned the wind is blowing in, so that's going to play into his favor as well. But, I mean, a lot of big bats he's going to have to navigate here. And he's got fine stuff, but it's not overpowering stuff that's going to fool a lot of these hitters. Yeah,
I just don't love his price either. I mean, there's guys priced a little bit lower than him that I feel a little bit more confident in. Some of them are favorites tonight, so he's a guy I'm going to be avoiding for the most part.
Yeah, I'm with you there. He's just doesn't have the greatest stuff. So, I mean, if I'm going to take a guy against Chicago on the road, it's going to be a guy that's got a dominant strikeout pitch, and he really just doesn't possess that. All right, next up, we've got a couple more guys we're going to talk about here. Here's the guy that does a great job of keeping the ball on the ground, is Jared Cozart. He's $6,200 on DraftKings. His FanDuel price is, once again eluding me, $7,200, so certainly out of play for me on FanDuel. A lot of other guys around that price, but if you're going cheap on the other side, this is a Mets team that has been absolutely on fire recently. They're pitching, or they're hitting the ball very, very well. But I mean, if you're looking at Cozart, 59.6% ground ball rate, doesn't strike anyone out, just under a 15% walk rate. Pretty average against lefties and righties. So I mean, you're getting what you pay for here. Well, you probably won't get what you pay for on FanDuel if you pay that, but on DraftKings, just over 6K. I don't think he makes for a terrible play because he does keep the ball on the ground. He faced this same Mets team in New York, gave up 5 runs in 5 1/3 with 5 Ks. But, I mean, he did have 8 ground ball outs in that, 12 and 11 his other 2. So if he can keep this ball on the ground, keep it in the park, he's given up 2 home runs so far this season. I think he makes for a decent GPP play, but really limited strikeout upside here.
Yeah, definitely. Not a guy that I'm looking too heavily at, but like you said, he can get the job done. Decent favorite. Nothing too exciting here, though. Probably like a really secondary cash game play for me on DraftKings. Probably a little too expensive on FanDuel.
Yeah, exactly. And he's not a guy that pitches particularly deep into games either. You're expecting at best probably 6 innings out of him. So we'll move on here to a guy that I know that you like tonight, Brett Anderson. $6,000 on DraftKings. His FanDuel price is fine as well. Nice cheap price tag there, $6,000, same exact price. So we know, obviously, keeps the ball on the ground. One of the better rates on the night at 58.2%. Doesn't strike out a lot of batters, but doesn't walk a lot of batters. Only a 3% walk rate so far. Tell me what you like here about Brett Anderson, other than the fact that he's a favorite.
Yeah, he's a pretty big favorite, actually, is one of the things that I like. The low price. San Francisco coming back from Colorado is nice for me, too. They saw a couple sinker ballers that really weren't getting the job done against them. It's always a tough transition back out of Coors, just like it's a bit of a tough transition into Coors. There's just a lot of stuff I like in this one. No real weather concerns, soft wind blowing out. I mean, I feel pretty good about this as a cash game play. He's not a guy I'm going to go after in GPPs. The strikeout upside just isn't there. He's not a guy that's going to pitch really deep into games. So he's a guy that I'm going to play for $6,000 and try to get an average game out of, like 6 2/3 and 2 or 3 runs given up. I don't think he's going to have a massive upside, but with him being a favorite, I feel pretty good about him on FanDuel. If you want to go really cheap and just load up hitters, And I think he's a great second cash game option on DraftKings if you're going to pay up for someone like Price or Shields.
Yeah, I like that call out. And, this is a Giants team that they have some guys who hit lefties pretty well.
Yep.
But they've been right at league average this year, 21.3% strikeout rate, 304 team WOBA, just a 121 team ISO, which certainly plays into Brett Anderson's favor here, especially being a ground ball pitcher. So I'm with you. I think he's a nice secondary play, but, you're certainly not expecting him to get 8 strikeouts, pitch 7 innings, anything like that. But if he gives you a quality start in the win, then, that's more than enough at that $6K price tag.
Yep, definitely.
All right, only a few more options here. We've got a few more minutes here left. We're going to talk about Jason Marquis. He's $4,700 on DraftKings. That's a lot of what brings him into play here. And obviously, tournament only. Don't you dare play him in a cash game. If you do, find one of my head-to-heads. I would love to play you. Jason Marquis at $5,500 on FanDuel. He actually has the highest strikeout rate of any pitcher in 2015 that's pitching tonight, which obviously is unsustainable at 29.6%. It's not going to maintain that. He's getting absolutely annihilated by right-handed pitching. 502 WOBA allowed. Did strike out 8 of these Brewers in Miller Park last time out, but also gave up 5 earned runs in 5 innings and what was eventually a shootout. But he did get the win. So, he's got some upside considering his price. But when you also consider that he's been getting crushed by righties, this is a righty-dominant lineup. Probably going to see 7 to 8 righties in this lineup tonight.
Yep.
Very, very risky play, but like you had said before when we were doing the DraftKings podcast, if he can get 5-6 strikeouts, maybe give you a quality start, even if he gives up a couple runs, especially on FanDuel where you don't get negatives for hits and walks, which you're going to see some of those, of course. This is a Milwaukee team that's been very, very beatable. So that price tag puts him in play for me in tournaments.
Yeah, that's the big thing. That really cheap price. He's a guy that can blow up really easily, and a lot of these Milwaukee guys have good numbers against him because they've both been in the Central for what feels like forever now. Yeah. It feels like Jason Marquis has been pitching for like 35 years. Terribly for 35 years.
Yeah.
But, he looked good against them last time. Like you said, he's had a pretty decent strikeout rate so far. I'm not really expecting it to continue, but for 4,700 against what's been one of the league's bottom 2-3 hitting teams all season so far, I think you can do worse in GPPs. That DraftKings price at $4,700 is just really cheap. I actually don't mind the last guy I have on the list here, Adam Warren, is a favorite for $4,300 on DraftKings also, facing a Tampa Bay team that really hasn't been hitting either. They've been running out some really bad lineups lately.
Yeah.
I feel decent about him, too. He feels a little bit more like a cash game play to me, where Marquis is a little bit more of a GPP play if you're looking that cheap. $4,300 is just ridiculously cheap for a guy that's a pretty heavy favorite here, and Warren, I think he's minus 140.
Yeah.
Marquis, not quite as high, minus 120, but getting favorites at this cheap, I think you can feel pretty good about both of them in GPPs. I think Warren is a respectable second pitcher option on DraftKings at $4,300 in cash games, honestly. Not a guy I'm really excited about with the 8 over-under, but I've definitely seen worse plays for more money that I've had to play as my second pitcher before.
Yeah, that's true. And just to put it in perspective, there's almost 50 hitters priced more than $4,300 tonight.
Right.
So even if you don't get a great start out of Warren, even if he doesn't get the win, doesn't get many strikeouts, he's not a high strikeout guy. But if he pitches 5 innings and gets you positive points, like he pitched against Detroit last time out, 9.4 points. If you play a 4.3K hitter and you get 9 points, you're generally pretty happy with that. So You can fill out that second roster spot at pitcher for 4.3K. Maybe get David Price or whoever your favorite top arm is. You can load up on other hitters, and if he gets you that 9 points, you're thrilled at that price.
Yeah, definitely. That's the big thing there is that price is just so cheap. It's really hard to ignore pitchers that are favorites when they're below 5K like that because there's so many hitters that you can pay for if you do that. And it makes it easy to get David Price or James Shields and a lot of hitters you want, where if you're trying to go David Price and James Shields, you're taking a lot of hitters you really don't want.
Yeah. And I think that's a great strategy that goes under-owned or underappreciated around the industry. People see a guy like him and they say, well, there's a reason he's 4.3K. He's probably going to get hit, but so what? At that price, it's a risk you're willing to take for that small amount of your salary.
Yeah, like you said, he's a guy that can get hit and still provide you some value. He could give up 8-9 hits. If you can spread them out a little bit and only give up 2-3 runs, you're sitting pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. And he faced the same Tampa Bay team, and I know he was the unlucky pitcher there where he gave up 2 home runs that were about 4 inches over the wall.
Yeah.
And you take those away, and I mean he had a pretty good start that game, but I mean after he gave up those 4 runs in that inning, I mean that's kind of the end of it there. So yeah, I mean if he can keep the ball in the park, I mean I love that strategy here in some tournaments tonight. All right, that's gonna wrap things up for us. Follow us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Check out all of our content for tonight's action at dailyfantasycafe.com, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.